I most definitely want to thank the Tokyo Foundation, to thank Akiko Matsunobu, who is herself a force of nature, as well as her incredible team for all the work they've done in putting this whole week together, and certainly tonight. We're very proud of the partnership that we have with Tokyo Foundation, particularly because of a shared value system when it comes to investing in leaders, and a belief that the world is changing so rapidly and we are becoming so interconnected that we need to invest in the next generation to identify, link, inspire young people to take on, as Akiko said, the notion of moral imagination, the notion of what it means to be human, and how we build and imagine a world that we can create together where all of us really have access to becoming the best that each of us can be. I want to thank Ruri Kawashima and the Japan Society as well for working in partnership with Tokyo Foundation and for making this week so special. And certainly, Professor Watanabe, I really look forward to our conversation, and thank you for your introduction. The passionate plea around how we think together about imagining capitalism in a truly interconnected world. For me, this is a story that really starts when I was a little girl, which is why I wrote the book, The Blue Sweater. And many of you know this story, but for those who don't, I thought I would start with why this journey has really been lifelong for me. It starts when I was 10 years old and I was given a blue sweater from my Uncle Ed, and I wore it all the time. It had zebras in the front and mountains right across the chest. And there was a day in high school, I believe that in every adolescent girl's life there is a humiliating experience that you never forget, and mine was when my high school nemesis yelled across the high school hall that the boys didn't need to go skiing on the mountains anymore, they could just ski on the mountains on my sweater. And so, feeling huge humiliation and mortification, I ran home to my mother, who ceremoniously put the sweater into the Goodwill, and I thought I would never have to see it again. Fast forward 10 years, and I had left my career on Wall Street, where I had actually worked with my friend Dan Chapman, who's been a great help to me. I had moved to Rwanda, where I was working with a small group of women to start the first microfinance bank in that country. And I was jogging through the hills of Kigali, when I saw a little boy 10 meters in front of me wearing my sweater. So I ran up to the child, I grabbed him by the collar, I turned it, and sure enough, there was not my name written on the collar of his sweater. And I have held that story ever since as a metaphor for how connected we are, and how our action and our inaction can impact people we might never know or never meet every day of our lives. It was an extraordinary time for me living in Rwanda. I saw what a small group of people can do if they put their minds to it. We built the country's first microcredit bank, and today that bank, 21 years later, is still the largest microfinance lending institution in the country, despite the fact that it went through genocide, despite the fact that during genocide we saw, I saw women with whom I worked every single day carry out atrocities of genocide. Some of them were killed, and some of them were real heroes, doing incredible things for the world. And I carried with me 3 really important lessons that go through the book, The Blue Sweater, and I thank AG Press for translating it into Japanese, but certainly go through Acumen Fund. The first is that markets alone will not solve problems of poverty. I think this is something that we're going to talk about. Markets are great at efficiency. Markets are great at listening as a listening device, but they're not so great at equality and inclusiveness. They're certainly not so great at bridging the gap between rich and poor. In fact, often they exacerbate it, and we're certainly seeing that in my country, the United States, but all around the world. On the other hand, traditional charity and aid, top-down approaches will not solve problems of poverty. Too often it creates dependence and not dignity. And if I learned anything over the last 25 years of doing this work in the developing world, it is that dignity is more important to the human spirit than wealth. That what is at the essence of what it means to be human is to know that we have choice and freedom, And too often economists look at poverty and define it in terms of whether you make $1 a day, $2 a day, $3 a day, when in fact what we really need to do is think about the choices that we have. Can we decide whether and where our children go to school? Can we decide the kind of health care that we have access to? That's really what poverty means. And if you look across the world, there may be wildly different income levels, and yet still people feel trapped and not part of the mainstream economy. So in 2001, I founded Acumen Fund with this idea that we could do better, that we actually could use the tools of the market and combine it with this ethos around moral imagination that could build solutions that reach the low-income people if we did one important thing, and that was to consider them not as passive recipients of charity, but as vital human beings, agents of change who wanted to make change in their own lives. At the heart of what Acumen Fund would do was invest what we call patient capital. That we believed that there was room for a new asset class, that we have charitable institutions and philanthropy, enormous, billions of dollars every year, in fact, hundreds of billions. The United States alone gives $250 billion in philanthropy. But instead of just giving it away, Acumen Fund would raise that money and then invest equity and loans in entrepreneurs, and I know there are lots of social entrepreneurs in this room, entrepreneurs that would dare to look at the poor as customers and build solutions from their perspective. Patient capital takes risks that traditional capital wouldn't take, outsized risk, leaves it for a very long time, long-term time horizon, and measures the returns not only in terms of financial impact, because we believe we need to get the money back so that we can reinvest, but also in terms of social impact. And that we would make a conscious and deliberate promise to the givers to Acumen Fund that we would share not only our successes but also our failures. We've invested about $40 million in the basic services, water, healthcare, housing, alternative energy, agricultural inputs. And we've seen that money create about 25,000 jobs and deliver tens of millions of people with basic services. Our investments are concentrated in Pakistan, India, Kenya, and Tanzania. And not only has it been incredibly exciting to see that social impact, and in some cases to see category breakers, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes, but also this year alone we've also seen over $1.2 million come back to Acumen Fund. By the end of the year we project that we will see $2.5 million come back so that then we don't have to raise that money, we have it to reinvest in the future. And so we're driven not by profit, by using patient capital so that we can really build on the greatest innovation that we can find around the world. So I want to give one quick example of how patient capital works, and why it's different than charity and why it's different than markets. This guy in the yellow shirt is named Amitabh Siddhangi. He's my age. He's been working in development in India for the same amount of time that I am, specifically with farmers that make $1 a day or less. There are 200 million farmers like that in India. And Amitabh was really frustrated because on the one hand, the big subsidy programs that government was offering, the poor farmers had no access to. The charity programs that they were offering often weren't giving the farmers exactly what they needed and they weren't valuing it. And on the other hand, the markets were commercializing drip irrigation and other systems that could reach farmers but not small-scale farmers. Amitabh was obsessed with Israel. Israel, which was desert land, just like Jordan and the other areas of the Middle East, had used this technology of drip irrigation, a way of using very small tubes to bring water to the deserts and transform them into emerald fields. But they were only focused on commercializing for the large-scale farmer. So Amitabh said, I want to look at those farmers that make $1 a day. I need to understand them, moral imagination, and I need to build a solution from their perspective. So we had 3 design concepts. The first was miniaturization. He needed to take that concept and make it so small that a farmer who had only 1 acre could buy a system that was only a 1/4 acre, because he was never going to risk everything that he had. The second was it had to be extremely affordable. In other words, the money that he put down, whether he borrowed it or had it himself, for that first quarter acre had to be repaid in a single harvest, or the farmer wouldn't take the risk. Extreme affordability. And the third was infinite and incremental expandability. After he made the money with that first quarter acre, he could buy a second quarter acre, and so on, and so on, and so on. And so by putting his mindset into that of the small farmer, Amitabha built a system without charity, where now over 350,000 farmers have been able to afford the drip irrigation, and on average we're seeing doubling and tripling of their yields, which means technically these farmers and their families, 1.5 million people, are moving out of poverty.